That I've had the privilege of knowing for many, many, many years, Mary Grant, who is the president of Mass College of Art, about to celebrate a 150-year anniversary. The college is extraordinary. We wish her much success as she celebrates the whole year, as she should. It's a jewel in our community. So it's hard to believe that we are now in the month of September, and it's been 6 months since we, the New England Council, have resumed our in-person events, and I don't know how many we've had, maybe 40, 50 in-person events all over New England and then in Washington. It's extraordinary. Next Monday, we're honored to be hosting Elizabeth Warren for Capitol Hill Report across town at the Seaport Hotel. Following day, we head north to New Hampshire for our Politics and Eggs, where former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will be speaking to the New England Council. We'll wrap up September with 2 Capitol Conversation events, both will be in Washington with Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut and our own Congressman here in Boston, Stephen Lynch, on the 29th. In October, we look forward to hearing from Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, Congressman Seth Moulton here of the Commonwealth, and several others, so stay tuned. Last but most certainly not least, we are thrilled to be hosting our 2022 annual celebration in person at the new Omni Hotel here in Boston. I don't know how many people have been inside that hotel. It's absolutely magnificent, and I think you're going to be very, very impressed. To all of you who have already participated and your arm has been twisted by Larry, thank you. Thank you for your generous support. We are doing extremely well, and it's only because of our members stepping up to the plate and saying, we'd like to support your annual celebration. And it's also because of the outstanding recipients, and they'll be announced very, very, very shortly. I just would like to give a little commercial to, without naming the recipient, just want to say Ed Keneally has done an outstanding job. If we could build a statue, I think we would for you. You've done so much in this dinner, so I just want to say thank you to you. But today we are delighted to welcome Congressman Jake Auchincloss for his first in-person program at the New England Council. And before being elected to the United States Congress, the Congressman was actually a New England Council member, working for several years at Liberty Mutual. And so I could think of no better person to introduce our very special guest this morning than a board member of the New England Council, Ed Keneally, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Public Affairs Officer at Liberty Mutual. Again, I thank all of you for joining us this morning, and I'm pleased and honored to turn it over to Ed.
Thanks, Jim. With respect to raising money for the dinner, fear and embarrassment are great motivators. They always have been. They always will be, at least for me. Good morning. This morning I have the distinct pleasure of introducing not only a former Liberty Mutual colleague, but a friend, Congressman Jake Auchincloss. As much as I like and respect Jake, his record of accomplishment in such a relatively short period of time leaves me feeling more than a little bit inadequate. As you all know, the Congressman is completing his first term as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, representing the Massachusetts 4th. His predecessors in the district read like a who's who of Massachusetts political royalty: Father Robert Drinan, Congressman Barney Frank, and Congressman Joe Kennedy. That said, Jake is already well on his way to establishing his own considerable legacy. Upon entering Congress, Jake was assigned to the powerful Financial Services Committee. That he was appointed the panel's vice chair as a freshman tells you something about the high regard in which he is held by his colleagues. Jake also serves on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, another indicator of the respect he has garnered from his more senior colleagues. He has staked out principled positions on issues as diverse as the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan and the benefits of free trade. and even penned a Washington Post op-ed on U.S. support for Ukraine with Congresswoman Liz Cheney. Jake was born and raised in Newton, and after graduating from Harvard, joined the Marines, where he commanded infantry in Afghanistan and special operations in Panama. Married to Michelle, and the father of 2 self-styled pandemic babies, he remains a major in the reserves. Clearly, this is a man dedicated to giving back and public service. He is unselfish, committed to effectively representing his constituents, passionate about his job, and someone I am proud to call both congressman and friend. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Jake Auchincloss for his inaugural appearance, at least in person, before a New England Council audience.
I appreciate the warm welcome from the New England Council and the gracious introduction from Ed, and mostly I appreciate that everybody so far has pronounced my name right, which the president was here yesterday for the second time, and he's batting 1 for 3 so far in getting my name right. My family's really struggling with it, but good morning. I'm Jake Auchincloss. I represent the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. It stretches from the inner suburbs of Boston, where I grew up, all the way south to the border of Rhode Island. And as Ed said, the Mass 4th previously elected heavy hitters Bob Drinan, Barney Frank, and Joe Kennedy. All of us, I think, would say the same thing. It's a complicated district. I represent a half dozen of the wealthiest Boston suburbs and 3 working class cities. I represent large Lusophone, Asian American, and Jewish communities. And I represent the reddest county in the state, as well as some of the bluest zip codes in the entire country. It brings to mind a scene from a movie I love called Charlie Wilson's War, in which Tom Hanks declares his Texas congressional district to be the easiest in Congress. He says they want their guns, they want low taxes, and they want to be left alone. And the MA4 is the exact opposite. MA4 has lots of opinions, and they share them. My campaign for Congress in 2020 so stressed out my wife, Michelle, that she got, a kidney stone in the final week of the campaign. How am I coming through now? Is that all right? I'll project. As I was saying, the campaign for Congress in 2020 so stressed out my wife, Michelle, that she developed a kidney stone in the final week. On the very night that I won, in September 2020, I drove Michelle to the Newton Wellesley Hospital. And while I'm waiting in the hospital room with her, I get a call from Nancy Pelosi to congratulate me. You gotta take that phone call. I have the speaker on speaker, and I have my wife in a hospital bed. And Nancy Pelosi tells us, I now represent a district with a national profile, and the next campaign starts tonight. The speaker was right, though, as always. The pace only picked up. My first Wednesday in office, January 6th. My second Wednesday, the impeachment. My third Wednesday, the insurrection. From there, the inauguration, thankfully, of Joe Biden. And from there, it was a once-in-a-century pandemic response, keystoned by the American Rescue Plan to help children who had been shipwrecked by the storms of COVID. And then it was a twin set of once-in-a-generation bills to invest in infrastructure, science, and domestic manufacturing. And then capstoned by the biggest, boldest climate action and clean energy commitment in history. All while defending women's rights and our very democracy from GOP attacks. The Marine Corps taught me that in conditions like this of fast decision-making and high stakes, you don't rise to the occasion. You fall to your level of training. And I believe I've got the political training for the environment that we are in. I grew up in a family of scientists where my mom and dad taught me the value of an open mind and hard data as they worked to cure cancer and diabetes. I commanded Americans from all walks of life in common purpose as a platoon commander in Afghanistan, a failed mission, and Panama, a successful one. Locally, I've worked with neighbors on housing, transportation, and education as a city councilor for my hometown. And I can tell you there is no better training for the rough and tumble of politics than chairing a public hearing about building more housing in a quiet neighborhood or taking away parking spots on Main Street. I've also worked in business at a Fortune 100 and a startup, building new products for tough markets. Most importantly, though, I'm the father of 2 children in diapers, Teddy and Grace. I'm the second youngest parent in Congress. And teaching Teddy and Grace that sharing is important and how to take turns is the best training I've had to date for Congress. I'm actually already reading to Teddy, who's 2.5, the same books that inspired my love for American history and caused me to have the portraits of the founding fathers on my bedroom wall from elementary school all the way through college. And the common thread across all these experiences that I outlined, from studying Hamilton and Madison to commanding special operations in the jungles of Panama to wrangling votes at City Hall, is learning how to make disagreement productive. It's the genius of our Constitution and our democracy, but it's unnatural. It takes effort. And as a country, we're forgetting how to do it. It starts with reaching out to work together where we do agree. In my first term, I've built relationships left, center, and right to deliver results. When the Supreme Court ruled against the Environmental Protection Agency, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and I co-led legislation to authorize the EPA to mandate generation shifting from fossil fuels to clean energy. This nation must achieve clean energy independence by investing in an all-of-the-above clean energy strategy that frees us from Middle Eastern oil. And a compromised version of our initiative has now become law. But independence does not mean isolationism, and with Americans struggling with high costs, I teamed up with Stephanie Murphy, who's the chair of the centrist Blue Dogs, to pressure the Biden administration to reduce tariffs to save working families hundreds of dollars a year. Expanding trade and embracing legal immigration is essential for raising productivity and lowering costs, at home and abroad. On the right, Liz Cheney and I have championed bipartisan support for the strategic defeat of Russia in Ukraine. The United States must lead the world in upholding the post-war rules-based order that has spread peace and prosperity to ever more people. And we need to send a stark message to the authoritarian regime in Moscow and Beijing that might does not make right, and that the United States is always going to stand with freedom and democracy. Worked with 3 very impressive women, very different women, to deliver results. But 2 of those 3 women aren't coming back to Congress. And that's a reflection of a democracy under duress. Individual politicians can't keep on building bridges on top of institutional foundations that are crumbling. We got to heal our federal republic. In the immediate term, that means ending Donald Trump's political career. I'm sick of talking about Donald Trump. I am sure you are all tired of hearing about him, so I'm not going to belabor this point. But Donald Trump is the 5-alarm fire in the House, and it must be put out. But even when the fire is out, the House is going to remain divided. To heal our union, we need reform from the roots. And we actually know what works. California's top 2 primary system, New Jersey's independent redistricting system, Alaska's instant runoff voting, and the banning of dark money in politics. The effect of these reforms is powerful and proven. They force politicians to compete for the hearts and minds of the average American voter instead of the purity test partisan. The average American voter is not buying what the hard left or the extreme right is selling. They want to hear about opportunity, not about grievance. The average American voter has common sense and decency. They don't think our differences as a people are too great to bridge. And the average American voter does not want Washington, D.C. to make America great again. They want us to make politics boring again. To unleash entrepreneurs to build big things because capitalism is how we compete. To empower mayors to solve hard problems because federalism is how we govern. To let people get on with our lives because freedom is how we define ourselves. I hope more states, including our own, adopt these reforms to empower the average voter. But we can't wait for ballot questions. We have to sharpen our arguments to cut through the noise that has exhausted the majority, because the carnival barkers for strongman rule or socialism are getting louder. We need to make our case directly to voters, not by scolding them on their alleged shortcomings, but by enlisting them in our cause. and I will go everywhere to talk to everyone. I go on Fox News to defend Roe and to argue for an assault weapons ban because the GOP has left the mainstream on these issues. 30 years ago, Republican senators from Kansas and Indiana voted to ban assault weapons. Imagine that today. And the fact that it's unimaginable reflects on the GOP, not on the United States. I go on MSNBC to defend the president for not expanding the Supreme Court. I go on Twitter to talk about stablecoins. I will continue to go everywhere to talk to everyone because we can't allow the flanks of each party to control the debate. The hard left needs to hear loud and clear that we're not going to open our jails or close our schools, and that patriotism is a yes-and endeavor. Yes, we can celebrate our heroes as a country, from Harriet Tubman to Teddy Roosevelt, and we can celebrate the progress we have made as a country. We're the greatest country in the world. The extreme right needs to hear loud and clear that we're not going to stay the greatest country in the world without free and fair elections. And the big lie from the GOP is a betrayal of the United States. The GOP has gotten lost in its thicket of lies. It has lost itself, and it's losing the center. The exhausted majority is there to be won, but Democrats have to go win it. And I'm looking forward to a conversation now with the New England Council about how we can do that. Thanks for your time.
Following the remarks of the Congressman, we're going to go upstairs. Any member of the Financial Service Committee would like to join us upstairs, as you heard from Ed Keneally, Vice Chair of the committee, which tells you an awful lot of how his colleagues view him in Washington. So let's take advantage of the opportunity to talk the issues that are in front of the Congressman. Questions for the Congressman? Maybe I just ask the opening question. Senator Manchin made a commitment. He gave his vote for that recent piece of legislation on climate change in order to have the opportunity of the Senate to take out the energy power permit language. Some people think it's very friendly towards fossil fuels. We read in the newspaper today, in the New York Times and other papers, that there are House members that are not buying into that agreement that he made with Senator Schumer, that it may fall apart in the House. Your thoughts on where this is going to go?
My bet's always on Nancy Pelosi's ability to get the votes, and I think she will. I'm going to vote for this, not because Joe Manchin struck a deal. Joe Manchin didn't call me when he was striking deals, so I'm not going to call him for his, but because for much of the environmental movement, the ability to stop us from building bad things was an important tool. More coal-fired power plants, more facilities that might endanger clean water, clean air. But in this new era of environmental progress, actually our ability to build new things is going to be critical to our success. Offshore wind, solar panel installations, new nuclear facilities. We have to be able to build as a country to get to the clean energy output that we need for 1.7 degrees by 2050. And so permitting reform that makes it easier to build big things and get this country entirely to a clean energy independence is good for the United States, and it's good for the Massachusetts 4th, because offshore wind is going to be a huge part of our economy in southeastern Mass, and the permitting reform will benefit that initiative.
There's only a few working days left in the House. Is there any pending legislation you think might pass?
Funding the government. We need to do that, and we will do that, I'm confident. There will be some changes. I hope that we should be able to pass some Medicare fixes for reimbursement issues, which will help patients and providers. Beyond that, I couldn't say with confidence.
Questions for the Congressman? Let's not raise them all at once.
So I guess my question is...
You want to identify yourself?
I'm Mark Walsh from Amalgamated Bank. How do you bridge the divide? You talk about Liz Cheney is sort of a beacon of the Republican Party, but you've got a lot of members that just don't want to cooperate at all. Do you see any hope for any cooperation in the next House, especially if the Democrats lose the House? How do you bridge that divide with what you've got right now in Congress?
It's a great question, and it reflects this dichotomy that we have in the 117th Congress, which is to one extent, it's never felt more polarized. The stakes have never felt higher with the extremism of the GOP on issues like abortion and election integrity, with cable news and social media tearing us apart in our collective psyche. And yet, if you actually look at the legislation that passed Congress, we've had some pretty significant bipartisan wins. Infrastructure, bipartisan. Chips and science, bipartisan. Gun safety, not exactly a huge achievement, but bipartisan. Inflation Reduction Act, not bipartisan, and yet a lot of the policy in there actually had been worked out in a way that was relatively bipartisan ahead of time. So, in some sense, Congress is demonstrating that even in a vitriolic environment, we're able to govern. But like I said in my remarks, until Trump is extinguished, until that fire is put out, I have no expectation nor hope that the GOP as an entity is going to come to its senses, because they've had 6 years to do the right thing. They haven't done it. And it's clear that self-interest is the most powerful motivator for them. Look at Kevin McCarthy, who is trying to become the Speaker of the House, and we're going to prevent him from doing that. He has no guiding principles other than power. Mitch McConnell, same thing. They have to be shown that Trump is a loser. And until they're shown that, they're not going to stand up for what's right against him. Having said that, in terms of specific legislation, I see lots of opportunities. I've done work on small community banks with Republican colleagues in the Financial Services Committee who are reasonable people. I am looking at doing some work on pharmacy benefit managers who are not operating in the best interests of patients right now, and we can do more to lower prescription drug prices by taking on PBMs. Could be a potentially bipartisan issue. Ukraine, so far we're holding it together as a bipartisan issue. I worry about what we're hearing from the extreme right and the likes of Tucker Carlson and others that are eating away at some of that support, and we see the president has a bill for $13 billion in additional money for materiel and weapons for Ukraine that the Republicans are balking at. That's worrisome to me. We need to send that money immediately. But there are opportunities to get stuff done. Individual members, most members of Congress understand that this is a profession and they don't take things personally. And so you can beat each other up and then still get work done. And I hope that attitude prevails, because I think it's a totally necessary one.
Other questions? Leo?
Hi, Leo Sarkisian with the ARPA, Massachusetts. Good to see you, Congressman. You're my congressman, by the way. This may not have a complete answer, but you just mentioned Tucker Carlson and the whole craziness of the social media world, the news world, lack of facts. I do have hope, too, that things can change, but what do you think are the elements or the events that are really going to turn this country around so that that noise doesn't affect the average person the way it does today? For example, I would say one would be these elections, right? If the elections send a strong message about those extremists, that would be one thing. Are there other things that you think could influence the climate? Because without a change in that climate out there, I'm not sure we're going to get to where we need to get to that you're speaking to.
Yeah, without totally retreading the ground, I really would double back on what I propose, which is in the immediate term, we have to defeat Donald Trump. As you said, he has to be proven to be a loser. A loser in the midterms in 2022, because his candidates won in the primaries. On balance, Trump had a good GOP primary season. So now we have to put Trump around the necks of every moderate candidate out there and show that he's going to cost them the House and the Senate at a time when they thought they were going to win both. And I'll give you one example of that. The Rhode Island 2nd right now. Rhode Island 2nd is an open seat, previously held by a Democrat for 20 years. We have a strong Democratic candidate running, Seth Magaziner, who I hope at some point will come speak with you. We have a moderate Republican mayor from the biggest city in the district running, Alan Fung, who is well-known, well-liked, popular. For someone like Alan Fung, we have to be able to put Trump around his neck and weigh him down so much that he loses the midterms. When that kind of stuff starts happening, I think you can break the fever in the GOP, because then they start losing seats that they thought they were going to win, and that is what will change their calculus. And we're going to do that, by the way. We're going to absolutely. I'm sure Alan's a nice guy. I have nothing against him, but this is varsity, and he's going to feel the heat. But then systemically, I really mean it. Top 2 primaries: independent redistricting, instant runoff voting, and get dark money out of politics. We do those 4 things, all of which, by the way, can be done at the state level. Dark money, state, federal. But the first 3, all done at the state level. you force the average American voter to become the pivotal vote in any given election bid, which they are not right now. They are not. The 15th percentile voter is the pivotal voter. We do that. You could keep the same 435 members of Congress probably, and you would just change their incentive structure.
Joe Donovan?
Congressman, thanks
Nice
again
to see you, Joe.
for being here. The president was in Boston yesterday, and among the things he talked about was life sciences and biotech. Obviously, there's a big play on the ARPA-H
Yeah.
program and office that Congress has already authorized funding for. Now, everyone in this room knows that we should be the location for ARPA-H, but what are you hearing? And can you provide any insight and maybe a bit of sort of the strategy that you and your colleagues are using
Yes.
to make that happen?
There is a coalition now in Massachusetts to bring ARPA-H to Boston. It's called CHARM, Coalition for Health Advances in Research in Massachusetts, I think. CHARM brings together the entire life sciences ecosystem, the academic medical centers, the biotechs, the congressional delegation, the city of Boston, et cetera. What I am hearing, ARPA-H, just for everyone's awareness, because it may not be common parlance, Advanced Research Projects Agency for Health, modeled on DARPA, $1 billion appropriated, that's real money given to it now, and they're looking for a location for this flagship health ventures outfit for the federal government with a mission to help cure cancer, Alzheimer's, et cetera. And absolutely, Boston deserves it. We're the best. We're the best in science. I had this debate with Secretary Becerra actually yesterday while we were waiting for the president to speak. He likes to say California's better. We all know it's not true. The NIH, the same day that they published SARS-CoV-2, the genetic sequence, the NIH was on the phone to people in Massachusetts. We've already done Advanced Research Projects Agency Health. It was called COVID, and Massachusetts led the way. We'll do it again. Right now, the decision makers seem to have this idea that it should be based in Washington with a decentralized program manager approach, where people are out embedded in San Francisco and Boston and Austin and anywhere. And I've argued quite forcefully that it should be based in Boston, and then they're free to go wherever they want, but they should be headquartered here, because it's important for our ability to be a convener of the best and brightest on these subjects, and we want to be able to have the program managers embedded in the world's best life sciences ecosystem. One more point on that. It may be that the most meaningful product that comes out of this entire initiative is actually not ARPA-H coming to a certain place, but CHARM itself. Because getting the Massachusetts life sciences ecosystem all talking to one another, all saying, like, what are we good at? What are we good at? Where do we overlap? What are our strengths? Is actually a pretty meaningful advance, and not one that we've, I think, as a state, sufficiently developed.
Who are the decision makers?
So ARPA-H reports to Secretary Becerra, but it has its overhead and its HR kind of done by NIH, which has managed, I think, to anger both sides. And then the White House will have a say in this as well. So the short answer is the ARPA-H director, who's previously worked at Ginkgo Bioworks, she's a Boston denizen, Secretary Becerra, and probably the White House OSTP director as well.
And that decision will be made
Soon.
before November?
I expect it'll be made in months. I don't know if I could say before or after the midterms, but they have $1 billion to spend, and they need to go ahead and start spending it. So they got to start making decisions.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Maria Astor from the Alzheimer's Association. Thank you for your help in supporting our community. There's over 284,000 families suffering from Alzheimer's, and caregivers are doing 400 million hours unpaid caregiving. What policy changes or what innovations do you think you could help to ease that burden on families?
Well, we had a strong program in place under Build Back Better, which was excised in the final deal for home and community-based care, which would have been important. And we need to be providing more support for unpaid caregivers. This applies not just to those caring for a loved one with a neurodegenerative disease or with cancer, but actually just people caring for dependents in general, for moms and dads and for those caring for a parent. We've got this invisible care economy that's not compensated. And we've got to start, I think, compensating them both in terms of services and also in terms of money. We see this also with early education. We don't pay our early educators nearly enough money, not relative to public educators, so we have to fix that as well. The most important thing we can do, though, for these families is to cure Alzheimer's. And the grim news here is that for 20 years, we actually have not made a huge amount of progress on understanding the foundational drivers of what leads to Alzheimer's. We've had some hypotheses. They have not seemed to fully play out the way that people thought they were. And what I have encouraged ARPA-H to focus on, amongst other things, is actually not necessarily a specific hypothesis around Alzheimer's, because I think that more appropriately belongs with basic researchers, but focus on how to make clinical trials cheaper for Alzheimer's therapeutics. Because clinical trials for Alzheimer's are exorbitantly expensive for reasons that you well understand, but it takes a long time for people to develop symptoms and to track their progress. It's hard to enlist people in these trials. And if we can do anything to make Alzheimer's trials much faster to a no or a yes, it's a very high leverage intervention to make any therapeutic then easier to develop.
Jim Siegel.
Thank you, Jake, for being here. I work closely with the three predecessors that Ed mentioned, and I'm glad to see that you are in their tradition of national leadership. My question is, do you think there's any chance the caucus rules will change in terms of leadership, chairman of committees? That it's the only thing the Republicans have done right? And Richie Neal waited 28 years before he became chair, and I don't want you to have to wait 28 years. The Republicans have 6 years, as you know.
That's right.
Either ranking or chair, and I think that makes a big difference in terms of leadership within Congress, in terms of having revolving and younger members.
Thanks, Jim, for your remarks. I'm a favor of meritocracy. I think it's a chance that we change the rules to have 6-year terms or some type of term limit for chairs. This is going to be I haven't seen how the internal caucus politics works yet. I just haven't been a part of it, so I don't feel like I've got a great barometer on how it's going to play out. But what I can say is that there's going to be a lot of members who are going to be raising that in their one-on-ones as various people are running for leadership positions in the future. That will definitely be one of the most salient points brought up. Whether it reaches a critical mass that actually get passed, I don't know.
Mary Grant, Mass College of Art.
Thank you. Surprisingly, my question is not about education. I want to thank you, though, for supporting student debt relief. Really important to have that happen. My question is about, you mentioned it about your work in Newton about affordable housing and workforce housing. And I think about attracting and retaining the talent of public institutions, teachers, firefighters, cops, cultural community, artists who enrich our communities. How do we think about the role differently of the role of federal government in helping communities reinvest in that important part of the ecosystem that helps us build strong, vibrant communities? So just any thoughts on that?
I don't want to step on a compliment, but I actually don't support student debt relief, I should say. I would rather have focused on medical debt relief or some way that was more equitable in relieving people's burdens. Happy to get into that more on the side. But in terms of how we can support those who enrich our community but aren't necessarily paid to reflect all the value they create, we've got a good program called Community Development Block Grants, which are just literally blocks of federal funding that we give to municipalities. We have worked and have had some success in expanding the amount of those that we give to municipalities. It's always a tension between how many strings we attach to that funding. Local officials hate it when we attach strings to federal funding. Federal policymakers always think that we have good ideas about how they should be spending it, including on things like helping these community members. So there's a tension there, but in general, the CDBG program has been effective in trying to increase those positive externalities that you're describing.
Maybe one other question? If not, can you just give us a little capsule update on some of your colleagues in New England and the fights that they face? New Hampshire, we have 2 congressional seats.
Yep.
Both of them are going to be contested heavily. The election is today. Jared Golden, the Democratic incumbent congressman, the 2nd congressional district in Maine, is facing the former Congressman Bruce Poliquin. Can you just, Johanna Hayes might have a competitive race in them. Just give us an update.
There's 6 in New England, and we're tracking them all closely. I'm supporting all of them. I have formed a leadership PAC, and we're going to contribute something like $400,000 to these competitive races, both New England, primarily focused on New England, but also throughout the country, because it's that important that we keep the gavel out of Kevin McCarthy's hands. I agree with you. We've got Seth Magaziner in an open seat in Rhode Island. We've got Johanna Hayes and Joe Courtney in Connecticut, Custer and Pappas in New Hampshire, and then Jared Golden in Maine. I know them all. They should all come back. They're all good members of Congress. I think if you're looking to maximize impact, Jared Golden is in a real hard fight. Bruce Poliquin is a former member. He's got high name ID in the Maine second, and the Republicans just put $2 million more a couple days ago behind negative ads against Jared. I have maxed out of every single account that I have for Jared. I've done an event for him. He is one of the most thoughtful, independent thinking members of Congress in the entire body. I've never seen somebody who more closely and effectively scrutinizes legislation for how it impacts his constituents than Jared. It's really quite impressive, and it would just be such a loss to lose him. And it has impact outside of just the math of one seat, because that is a rural, working class district, and Kevin McCarthy thinks that district belongs to him. He's told Jared before that Jared's, quote, renting that seat from Kevin. Okay, and so there's a psychic impact to our ability to demonstrate that 3 cycles in a row, good cycles and tough cycles, we can hold that seat with the right candidate. That has impact in Ohio and Western Pennsylvania and Iowa. It demonstrates a playbook that undermines the GOP's political math for a majority in the House, all told. So that seat, the Maine second, more than any other one in New England, really has sort of punches above its weight. And then the other one I'll highlight is like I said, Seth in Rhode Island. Everybody knows Alan Fung, and people think of him as the mayor. Reasonable guy. And we need to start defining him not as Mayor Fung, but as the guy who's going to vote for Kevin McCarthy and vote against codifying abortion at the national level. That needs to be his introduction to voters, and Seth's going to need help doing that.
That second congressional district in Maine, that's a district that President Trump carried.
By 7, I think. Yeah, no, that's not even close.
And a Marine.
And my roommate.
And your roommate.
I should say, too.
What do you think of these Democratic funded organizations that are now tipping their toe into Republican primaries and supporting a far-right election denier candidates in order to find them more attractive for Democrats to knock off in November?
Yeah, I've got a policy ahead of the midterms of hanging together with my Democratic colleagues and not airing internal debates or conversations about strategy. I think ahead of the midterms. I think at this point we know what the fight is, and my focus is on that fight. And conversations that happen within the caucus about strategy, I think, need to stay within the caucus until after the midterms.